strange medieval punishments that will leave you horrified. Justice. In the medieval world, it wore a face so twisted, so bizarre, that it would make modern audiences recoil in horror. Welcome to an age where punishment was public spectacle and cruelty masqueraded as righteousness. Between the years 500 and 1500 AD, European justice systems developed punishments so strange, so inventive in their cruelty, that they seem like the product of fevered nightmares rather than legal precedent. What we see in medieval punishment is a society obsessed with public humiliation and symbolic justice. The punishment had to fit not just the crime, but send a message that everyone could understand. Our first stop on this journey into medieval madness: the drunkard's cloak. For the crime of public intoxication, offenders faced a punishment that was equal parts humiliating and hazardous. Picture this. You've had one too many ales at the tavern. Instead of sleeping it off, you find yourself trapped inside a heavy wooden barrel, forced to stumble through town as crowds mock and pelt you with rotten vegetables. The victim would wear this barrel for hours, sometimes days, unable to sit or lie down properly. Many collapsed from exhaustion, while others suffered serious injuries from falls. Medieval society believed that shame was more powerful than pain. They wanted criminals to internalize their guilt through public humiliation. But perhaps no punishment was more bizarrely specific than what awaited dishonest bakers. Meet the bread pillory, a punishment so strange it defies belief. Bakers caught selling underweight or adulterated bread would be locked in the pillory with their fraudulent loaves tied around their necks. As the bread rotted, so did their reputation. The genius of this punishment was its symbolic nature. The very thing they had corrupted, bread, the staff of life, became their public shame. For women caught gossiping or nagging, medieval society had devised something truly diabolical: the scold's bridle, also known as the gossip's bridle. This iron cage would be locked over a woman's head, with a metal bit forced into her mouth to prevent speech. But the true horror lay in the spikes. Any movement of the tongue would cause the internal spikes to pierce flesh. Speaking became impossible, eating agonizing. Women would be paraded through town, blood often streaming from their mouths. The scold's bridle represents medieval society's fear of women's voices. It wasn't just punishment. It was a tool of gender oppression. By the riverside, another punishment awaited those accused of witchcraft, adultery, or disturbing the peace: the ducking stool. The victim would be strapped to this chair and repeatedly plunged into freezing, often filthy water. If they survived, they were guilty. If they drowned, well, at least they were innocent. This was trial by ordeal taken to its logical extreme. The punishment became the trial itself. But perhaps the strangest punishment of all was reserved for those who broke religious law, the penance of public nudity. Religious offenders would be stripped of all clothing and forced to walk through town carrying candles, while crowds jeered and threw objects. The cold, the shame, and the physical abuse often proved fatal. From a psychological standpoint, These public humiliation punishments were designed to break the individual's sense of self. They're textbook examples of psychological torture. The pillory itself came in many bizarre variations. For different crimes, different modifications were added to increase the suffering. Thieves might have their hands nailed to the wooden boards. Liars would have their tongues pinned to the pillory with iron spikes. The crowd was encouraged to throw not just rotten food, but rocks, human waste, and dead animals. What's horrifying is how organized it was. These weren't random acts of violence. They were state-sanctioned torture with cheering crowds. The Branks was another iron head cage, but this one was designed for thieves and featured a long metal tongue that protruded from the mouth, making the wearer look like a grotesque gargoyle. Unable to close their mouth, victims would drool uncontrollably while the metal tongue prevented normal speech. They were paraded through town looking deliberately inhuman. But medieval justice didn't stop at death. Even corpses could face punishment. Meet the practice of post-mortem prosecution. They would literally put dead bodies on trial. If found guilty, the corpse would be hanged, burned, or dismembered as punishment. Families would be forced to watch their loved ones' remains be desecrated in public, adding psychological torture to their grief. For counterfeiting, medieval justice created something truly horrific: molten metal punishment. Counterfeiters would have molten lead or silver poured down their throats, literally filling them with the very material they had sought to falsify. These punishments reveal a society that believed crime was a moral failing that required physical purification through suffering. For traitors and rebels, the punishment was gibbeting, being hanged in an iron cage and left to die slowly of thirst, exposure, and starvation. The victim would be placed alive in this cage and hoisted high above the town. Death could take weeks. The corpse would remain as a warning until it rotted away completely. These strange and horrifying punishments reveal a medieval mind obsessed with public shame, symbolic justice, and the belief that suffering could somehow purify the soul. Today, we look back at these practices with horror and disbelief. Yet, they remind us that justice, like civilization itself, is fragile. The line between order and cruelty is thinner than we might like to believe. Medieval punishments were designed not just to punish the guilty, but to terrify the innocent. They stand as monuments to humanity's capacity for systematic cruelty, wrapped in the robes of righteousness. These medieval practices were abolished centuries ago, but they serve as reminders of the importance of humane justice and the protection of human dignity. Women bore the greatest burden, often treated as political commodities rather than human beings with their own desires and ambitions. But men also suffered under these systems. Elite males found their marriage choices constrained by political necessity, while common men faced laws that made marriage economically impossible without imperial approval. The psychological trauma of these systems rippled through generations, creating cultures where intimate relationships were always secondary to political considerations. As we survey the ruins of these ancient empires, their monuments to power crumbling into dust, We might think their systems of sexual control died with them, but the legacy lives on. Modern nations still use marriage law to define citizenship, control immigration, and manage social relationships. The tools may have evolved, but the fundamental insight remains. Controlling sexuality means controlling society. The ancient empires discovered that the most effective chains aren't made of iron. They're made of desire itself. When you control who people can love, you control who they are. Perhaps most chilling is how willing people were to accept these systems. The promise of social status, economic security, and imperial protection made sexual submission seem like a reasonable trade. The ancient empires taught us that freedom isn't just about political rights or economic opportunity. It's about the fundamental human right to choose your own intimate relationships without state interference. In the end, the greatest victory of ancient sexual control wasn't military conquest or territorial expansion. It was convincing people that their most intimate choices should serve someone else's ambitions. The empires are gone, but their lesson remains. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, not just against armies and laws, but against any system that claims the right to control human hearts.